I stopped being a respiratory therapist on a Thursday. The way people stop believing in something, quietly, all at once. No dramatic exit. No confrontation in a hallway. I finished my shift at Harborview, charted what I had to chart, wiped down the last vent cart, and walked out into the parking garage with the sound of alarms still echoing in my skull like a song I couldn't turn off. 7 years in ICU teaches you how to read panic in a person's eyes before they even speak, how to tell the difference between I'm scared and I'm failing by the shape of a breath. It also teaches you the cruel part. You can be good at saving people and still lose yourself in the process. By the time I got into my car, my hands were steady, but my insides weren't. I sat there with the engine off and knew with the kind of certainty that feels like gravity that if I came back tomorrow, something in me would finally split. When I gave my notice, my manager didn't argue. She just looked at me like she'd seen that exact hollow brightness before. Burnout, she said, gentle as a diagnosis. What now, Mina? I told her the truth I barely understood myself. Something with kids. Just not machines. Not that kind of helpless. 9 months later, I was standing in a kitchen that smelled faintly of lemon and disinfectant, staring at a schedule taped to a marble counter like it was a sacred text. Alder Cove was supposed to be my soft landing. Small coastal town, salt air, cedar trees, a horizon wide enough to breathe into. The job listing had felt like a compromise. Private caregiver, 1 child, steady pay, no trauma code blues at 2 a.m. I almost didn't apply because the words complex respiratory needs made my chest tighten in sympathy, but the salary was more than I'd ever made in the hospital, and I told myself the lie exhausted people tell when they need a lifeline. It's just 1 kid. 2 days after I sent my resume, iron gates opened for me, and a modern glass house appeared on a hill like a museum pretending to be a home. Elodie Quinn met me at the door. Late 30s, expensive casual, eyes that looked like they hadn't slept properly in years. Her husband, Graham, shook my hand in the living room with a firm grip and a polite urgency, the kind of man who tried to keep his fear organized. They didn't ask what I liked about working with children. They asked how fast I could recognize cyanosis, how comfortable I was with nebulizers, whether I could stay calm during an episode. When I asked what their son liked, what made him happy, there was a pause long enough to make the room feel colder. Documentaries, Graham said finally, like he was guessing. Chess, Elodie added quickly. He's very mature. 10 years old, and mature was the best adjective they had. That word landed in me like a warning. My first morning started before sunrise. Elodie was already dressed, coffee in hand, speaking fast as she ran through the routine. Wake at 6:30, breakfast at 7, nebulizer at 7:30, inhaler at 9, vitamins at 10, rest at 11, tutor at noon, light lunch at 1, inhaler at 2, breathing exercises at 4, dinner at 5, night meds at 6. Watch him constantly, she said, eyes sharp with dread. If he coughs, check his oxygen. If he clears his throat, ask how he feels. If he gets excited, calm him down. Excited, like joy was a trigger. Graham hovered in the doorway with his briefcase and gave me a grateful smile that looked more like surrender. Then they left, and the house fell into that heavy, expensive quiet. No laughter, no mess, just the low hum of air filtration. Kai's room upstairs was the nicest medical station I'd ever seen outside a hospital. Pulse oximeter on a dock, peak flow meter, humidifiers, inhalers labeled by time, emergency steroids locked away, a binder thick with episodes, triggers, notes. And in the bed, a small boy with dark curls and long lashes, pale in a way that didn't look like illness so much as indoor life. When he opened his eyes, he looked at me without surprise, as if strangers supervising his breathing was normal. "Where's Mom?" he asked. "Work," I told him. "She'll be home later." He nodded once, flat and practiced. "How do you feel?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle, the way you speak to someone you don't want to startle. He didn't even think. "Tight," he said. Downstairs, he ate 3 bites of eggs and pushed the plate away, watching my face like he was waiting for me to confirm something terrible. "My chest feels tight," he repeated, quieter this time. I clipped the pulse ox to his finger. 98%. Good color. No wheeze I could hear. His breathing was fast, but not distressed. Still, when the nebulizer started, soft hiss, steady mist, his shoulders like someone had finally told his body it was allowed to stop bracing. And that was my first real clue. Whatever was happening to Kai, it wasn't only about air, it was about safety. The first 2 weeks with Kai felt like living inside someone else's anxiety attack. Every hour had a box to check, every sensation had a protocol, every ordinary moment came with a shadow of what if. I followed Elodie's schedule exactly because it wasn't my place to rewrite a family's rules on day one, and because part of me still carried the hospital instinct. If you deviate and something goes wrong, you never forgive yourself. So we did breakfast, nebulizer, inhalers, vitamins, rest, tutor, light lunch, another inhaler, breathing exercises, rest again. Kai moved through it all like a child on autopilot, obedient, quiet, watching my hands the way kids watch nurses, waiting for the next intervention. He rarely asked for anything. When I offered choices, cartoons or a movie, drawing or board games, he blinked like I'd given him a question in a language he didn't speak. "I don't know," became his default answer. If I asked what he wanted, he'd glance toward the kitchen where the schedule hung, like wanting wasn't allowed unless it was written down. The strangest part wasn't the equipment or the medication bins. It was the way joy seemed medically contraindicated in that house. Elodie had warned me about excitement like it was pollen, and Kai had absorbed that warning so completely he monitored himself for happiness the way he monitored himself for tightness. Elodie texted constantly, even when she was supposedly in meetings. "O2? Any cough? Any throat clearing?" If I didn't respond within 10 minutes, she'd call. "He's fine," I'd say, and then I'd hear her exhale like she'd been holding her breath the entire time. Graham checked in once a day, always brief, always trying to sound calm. "Everything okay?" he'd ask. "No episodes?" There was a flatness in his voice, like optimism had become something he didn't trust. The more they asked, the more Kai asked himself. He'd pause mid-step and press a hand to his chest. "Is my breathing weird?" He'd whisper. Sometimes he'd ask it 3 times in an hour, like repetition could summon certainty. And when he did have tightness, it wasn't accompanied by wheezing or retractions or that panicked look I knew too well from ICU. It was more like a wave of sensation that rose when he was alone with his thoughts, when he was about to do something unfamiliar, when he thought he might disappoint someone. The nebulizer didn't just treat him, it soothed him. The sound, the ritual, the mask, the attention, safety delivered in mist. One afternoon after tutoring, I tried again. "Kai, what do you want to do now?" He sat on the couch like a small statue, hands folded, eyes fixed on nothing. "Rest," he said automatically. "Do you feel tired?" I asked. He hesitated, as if he wasn't sure what tired felt like unless someone told him. "Maybe," he said. Then, softer. "If I get tired, Mom gets scared." That sentence lodged in my chest and didn't move. Because it wasn't really about fatigue. It was about permission. His body wasn't just his. It belonged to their fear. That night, after Kai went to bed, I sat at the marble counter with the thick binder labeled episodes, triggers, notes, and read it like I used to read charts during night shifts. Looking for patterns, not drama. What I found wasn't a clear medical story. It was escalation. 2 years ago, a bad winter virus, lingering cough, then shortness of breath during play. Then a pulmonology visit. Inhaled steroids added. Rescue inhaler became scheduled to prevent attacks. Antihistamines for possible allergies. Reflux meds, just in case. A note about anxiety management, crossed out in Elodie's handwriting. A prescription for oral steroids for peace of mind after a night of hyperventilation and pale lips. Page after page of specialists treating slices of a whole child, each adding something, nobody subtracting. And threaded through every entry, like a second diagnosis written between the lines, was Elodie's fear. Watched closely, kept home, avoided triggers, restricted activity, monitored constantly. I looked at the medication list on the counter and felt my old ICU brain click into place. Steroids could make his heart race, make him feel wired and tight. Antihistamines could dry his throat and make every swallow feel wrong. Scheduled rescue inhaler use could make him jittery. The treatments weren't imaginary, and neither were his sensations, but the system around him was teaching his body to expect danger at every turn. And when you expect danger, you feel it. Over and over. A loop so perfect it could masquerade as disease. I sat there in the sterile quiet, listening to the hum of the air filters, and made a decision that felt both tiny and enormous. I wasn't going to rip the routine apart. I wasn't going to play hero. But the next morning, I was going to ask Kai a different kind of question. One no one in that house seemed to ask anymore. Not how do you feel, but what do you miss? The next morning, after Kai's nebulizer and the inhaler Elodie insisted was non-negotiable, I waited until the house settled into its usual rhythm, quiet, controlled, braced. Kai sat at the dining table with his workbook open, pencil hovering, eyes drifting toward the window like the outside world was a thing that belonged to other children. I poured us both water and sat across from him instead of beside him, the way you sit when you want a real conversation, not a check-in. Kai, I said, keeping my voice casual so it wouldn't feel like a test, can I ask you something that isn't about symptoms? He blinked, suspicious, but nodded. I took a breath. What do you miss? For a second, he didn't answer, like the question hit a wall in his mind and bounced back. Then he looked down at his hands. I don't know, he said, automatic. Try, I said gently. Before all the schedules, before you had to think about your breathing all the time. His fingers tightened around the pencil. I miss being outside, he whispered, like admitting it could get him in trouble. I didn't pounce on it. I just nodded like it was the most normal thing in the world. Me too, I said. The house feels like it's holding its breath. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. Do you miss anything else? He hesitated. I miss loud, he said, confused by his own answer. Loud? I repeated. He shrugged, cheeks faintly pink. Like when kids are yelling at the park, when someone's laughing and it's annoying, but it's loud. My throat tightened. Loud meant life. Loud meant messy. Loud meant not listening for danger in every inhale. I glanced at the schedule on the counter, then back at him. Okay, I said softly. Let's do something small today. Not reckless. Small. His eyes widened. Like what? He asked, fear already climbing into his voice. I leaned forward. We're going to step outside for 5 minutes. Just the porch. We'll bring your inhaler. We'll check your oxygen before and after. You're not trapped out there, Kai. You're allowed to come back in whenever you want. He stared at me like I was offering him a forbidden fruit. Mom doesn't like wind, he said. Wind makes it worse. Wind can feel weird, I agreed. So we'll wear a jacket, and we'll treat weird as information, not catastrophe. It took him a full minute to stand. When he finally did, he moved like the floor might disappear. I grabbed a light jacket from the closet, tucked his inhaler into my pocket, and walked with him to the front door. His hand hovered near the handle like he expected it to bite. Ready? I asked. He swallowed. Not really, he admitted. That's okay, I said. We can do scared. We stepped outside. The air hit us cold and clean. Salt threaded through it from the ocean somewhere beyond the trees. Kai flinched like his body didn't recognize fresh air anymore. His chest rose faster. I feel tight, he said immediately, voice small. I didn't rush him back inside. Rate it, I said, calm. 1 to 10. He blinked. 6? Okay, I said. Now look around. Tell me 5 things you see. He frowned, but obeyed. Trees, the mailbox, your car, the sky, a bird. Good, I said. Now take 1 slow breath in through your nose. Not big, just slow. He did. His shoulders dropped a fraction. Oxygen, I said, pulling the pulse oximeter from my bag. Yes, I brought it because Elodie's fear had made me practical. I clipped it on. 97. You're okay, I said quietly. Your body is just loud right now because it's not used to this. Kai stared at the number like it was proof of innocence. We sat on the porch steps, Kai's hands pressed into the wood, feeling the texture like it mattered. Can we go back in now? He asked, but his voice wasn't desperate. It was cautious, like he was testing whether I would respect him. We can, I said, or we can stay 1 more minute and listen. Listen to what? To normal, I said. Somewhere down the street, I heard kids shouting, just faint, just real. A dog barked. A car door slammed. Life. Kai's eyes lifted toward the sound and something in his face softened, the way a starving person looks at food. That's loud, he whispered. Yeah, I said, and no one is dying because of it. He let out a small breath that sounded like surrender. When we went back inside, Kai didn't rush. He walked in like the door was no longer a boundary between safe and unsafe, but simply a door. He sat at the table again, pencil in hand, and for the first time since I'd met him, he asked me a question that wasn't about his body. Can we do that again tomorrow? My chest tightened, but not from fear, from hope. If you want, I said. I want, he said, firmer. And that was the moment I knew the real battle in that house wasn't Kai's lungs. It was the story everyone had been telling him about what his body was allowed to do. Elodie came home early that afternoon. I heard her keys, her heels, the sharp edge of panic in the way she moved through rooms. "Where is he?" she called before she even saw me. "He's upstairs finishing his work," I said. She appeared in the doorway, eyes scanning me like she expected bad news to be written on my face. "Anything happen?" she asked. "Any tightness? Any cough?" I chose my words carefully, but the truth felt like a lit match. "We went outside for a few minutes," I said. Elodie's face went white. "Outside," she repeated, like I'd said, into traffic. "Just the porch," I added. 5 minutes. His oxygen stayed normal. He did great. Her hands shook. "You can't, Mina. You can't do that without telling me." "Elodie," I said softly, "he asked me what he missed today." She blinked, thrown. "What?" "He misses being outside," I said. "He misses loud." And the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of fear, of love, and of the dangerous new possibility that maybe, just maybe, her son wasn't as breakable as she'd been told. Elodie didn't yell right away. That was what scared me. She stood in the kitchen doorway with her coat still on, one hand gripping her purse strap like it was the only thing keeping her upright, and her eyes went past me, up the stairs toward Kai, like she needed to confirm he was still intact. "You went outside," she said again, slower this time, as if repeating it might make it less real. "Just the porch," I answered, keeping my voice even. 5 minutes. I checked his oxygen. He was fine. Her mouth tightened. "You checked his oxygen," she echoed, and I could hear the desperation under the control. "And if it had dropped?" "Then we would have come inside," I said. "We would have used the plan you already have, but it didn't drop. He didn't wheeze. He didn't spiral. He listened to kids down the street, and he looked like a kid." Elodie's eyes flashed with something sharp. "You don't get to decide what he can handle," she said. "I'm his mother." "I know," I said softly. "That's why I'm telling you, not hiding it." Her breath came faster. "Do you understand what could happen? Cold air, wind, germs, a delayed reaction. He could crash later, and you'd think everything was fine because a number said 97. She said 97 like it was an insult. I swallowed, choosing my words carefully because I could already feel the tripwire. "Elodie," I said, "Kai is scared of his own body. That's what I'm seeing. He checks himself constantly. He's living like he's one mistake away from suffocating." Her eyes filled instantly, but her voice went harder. "Because he is one mistake away," she snapped. "You don't know my son like I do." Graham walked in then, tie loosened, phone still in his hand like he'd been halfway through a call. He took one look at Elodie's face and said, "What happened?" Elodie turned on him. "She took him outside," she said, pointing at me like I'd committed a crime. Without telling me, Graham's gaze flicked to me, questioning, not furious. "Outside where?" "The porch," I said. 5 minutes. It was controlled." "Controlled by who?" Elodie cut in, voice cracking. "By her? By her pulse oximeter? You think this is a game?" Graham's jaw tightened. "Elle," he said quietly, warning. She wasn't hearing him. "She's already pushing," she said, eyes wild. "First the porch, then what? The park, the beach, running, and then when he can't breathe, I'm the one who has to live with it." Something in her voice broke on the last word. Live, like she wasn't sure she would survive it. I took a step closer, not aggressive, but present. "I'm not trying to override you," I said. "I'm trying to show you what I'm seeing. Kai told me he misses being outside. He misses loud. He misses being normal." Elodie flinched like normal was a dangerous word. "Normal," she whispered, bitter. "He is not normal." "He is a child," I said, and I felt the line tighten between us. "And right now he's being treated like happiness is a trigger." Elodie's face hardened into something final. "Get your things," she said. "This isn't working." The air went cold in my lungs. For a second, I saw myself packing a bag, leaving through those gates, driving away while Kai stayed behind inside the same loop. "Elodie?" I started. "No," she said, sharp. "You don't get to gamble with him." And then Kai appeared on the stairs, drawn by the edge in her voice. He stood there in sock feet, one hand on the railing, eyes moving between us like he was watching a storm form. "Mom?" he asked. Elodie's expression changed instantly, softened, smoothed over, fear repackaged as tenderness. "Baby, are you okay?" she asked, rushing to the bottom step. "Any tightness? Any cough?" Kai hesitated. His gaze flicked to me, then back to her. "I'm okay," he said, uncertain, like he wasn't sure which answer was allowed. Did you feel tight outside? Elodie pressed. A little, he admitted, and her face tightened with triumph, like that was proof. See, she said to me, snapping her head up. He felt it. Kai's shoulders hunched, but then, quietly, bravely, he added, but it didn't get worse. Elodie blinked. What? It didn't get worse, he repeated, voice steadier. And I liked it. Silence swallowed the kitchen. Kai swallowed hard. I liked hearing the kids. He said, I liked the air. Elodie's eyes filled again, not with anger this time, but with something that looked like grief. Baby, she whispered, you don't understand. Maybe I do, Kai said, and my heart lurched because he sounded older than 10 for a second, not mature, just tired. He looked at his mom and asked, very softly, what if I'm scared because you're scared? Graham exhaled like someone had finally cracked a window. He pulled out a chair at the kitchen table. Okay, he said, voice low, careful. Everyone sit down. Elodie's hands trembled. Mine did too, but I kept them still. Kai came down the stairs slowly and slid into a chair like he expected punishment. Elodie sat rigid beside him as if sitting meant surrender. Graham looked at me. Explain, he said. Not the porch, the bigger thing you think you're seeing. I took a breath, felt the old ICU calm settle into my bones, and said the truth as gently as I could. I think Kai's symptoms are real, I began. But I also think the way his life is structured, constant monitoring, constant prevention, constant fear, might be feeding the tightness. I think we might be stuck in a loop. Elodie's eyes narrowed, defensive hope and terror warring on her face. And what are you suggesting? She asked, voice shaking. I met her gaze and didn't flinch. I'm suggesting we stop doing this alone, I said. One coordinating doctor, one plan. A monitored trial. Not reckless, not blind, just a chance to see what happens when Kai is allowed to be 10 again. We didn't solve anything at that kitchen table that night, not really. What we did was something rarer in that house. We paused the panic long enough to think. Graham asked questions like a man trying to build a bridge across a canyon. Careful, measured, looking for solid ground. Elodie kept circling the same fear like it was a rosary bead. If we loosen our grip and something happens, we won't forgive ourselves, she said, voice cracking. Kai sat between them, shoulders slightly hunched, watching their faces the way children watch weather, learning what kind of storm they're allowed to be. When it got quiet, I said the only thing that felt honest and safe at the same time. I'm not asking you to gamble, I told Elodie. I'm asking you to stop improvising. You've been collecting specialists and protocols and medications like armor, but armor gets heavy. It changes how you move. What if we find one person to coordinate everything and we run a trial, supervised, monitored, reversible? Graham latched onto that word immediately. A trial, he repeated, like it gave him something to hold. With Dr. Huang, I added, because they'd mentioned her before. Kai's primary, the one they hadn't gone back to in months because she didn't feed the urgency the way other doctors did. Elodie flinched at the name. She thinks it's anxiety, she whispered. She thinks you're scared, Graham said quietly, and that landed harder than any accusation. Elodie pressed her lips together, then looked at Kai. Do you want this? She asked, and her voice was almost angry, like she needed him to say no so she could keep control. Kai swallowed. I want to try, he said. I don't want to be scared all the time. His eyes flicked to me, then back to her. And I don't want you to be scared all the time either, Mom. That was the moment Elodie's face cracked, not into fury, but into exhausted grief. She nodded once, tiny. One appointment, she said. We talk. That's all. Graham reached across the table and covered her hand. One appointment? He agreed. And just like that, the house had a new plan that wasn't written on the schedule. Dr. Lian Huang saw us the next morning. Her office smelled like coffee and paper instead of antiseptic, and I noticed immediately how Elodie's shoulders tensed anyway, bracing for judgment. Dr. Huang was the kind of doctor who didn't warm you up with small talk. She read the room first. She looked at Kai, really looked, and then she looked at the binder Elodie placed on her desk like an offering. That's a lot, she said, flipping through pages. Elodie's mouth tightened. We were trying to help him, she said quickly. I know, Dr. Huang replied, calm. But help can become a trap when it's built on fear. Elodie's eyes flashed. He can't breathe sometimes, she said. I've seen it. I believe you, Dr. Huang said, and that softened something in Elodie immediately. Then Dr. Huang turned to Kai. When you feel tight, what's happening right before it? Kai thought, genuinely. Usually I'm about to do something, he said. Like go downstairs, or talk to someone, or when I think I might mess up. Dr. Wong nodded slowly. That's useful, she said. And then she looked at the medication list and sighed again. Not dramatic. Practical. Some of this can make tightness feel worse, she said. Some of this can make you jittery. Some of this can make your throat feel strange. And when your body feels strange, your brain fills in the worst story. Elodie started crying silently beside Kai, the way people cry when they realize they've been holding a weight for too long. Graham asked the question he'd been avoiding for months. So is it real? He said. Is he sick? Dr. Wong didn't flinch. He has mild reactive airway, she said. That's real. But the severity you're living like, constant monitoring, constant rescue meds, constant avoidance, doesn't match what I'm seeing in his history. Elodie sucked in a breath like she'd been hit. So you're saying it's in his head, she whispered. Dr. Wong leaned forward. I'm saying it's in his system, she corrected. Body and brain together. And the good news is, systems can be retrained. The plan she laid out was simple on paper and terrifying in practice. One coordinating doctor, objective tracking instead of constant checking, rescue inhaler only when needed, not because the clock said so, review and reduce anything that could amplify sensations. And the hardest part, expand Kai's life in small, controlled steps. 10-minute walks, Dr. Wong said, not to prove he's fine, to teach his body that movement and air are not emergencies. Elodie wiped her face. And if he gets worse? She asked, voice shaking. Dr. Wong nodded once. Then we adjust, she said. That's what supervision means. This isn't denial. This is data. Kai stared at the doctor like she'd handed him a map out of a maze. So I'm allowed to try? He asked. Dr. Wong's expression softened. You're allowed to be 10, she said. On the drive home, Elodie sat very still, hands folded tightly in her lap like she was afraid to move and break the new hope. Graham kept glancing at her, then at Kai in the rearview mirror. Kai looked out the window and whispered, almost to himself, maybe the air isn't the enemy. I didn't say anything. I just listened. Because in that moment, the most important sound in the car wasn't an alarm or a wheeze. It was a child imagining a life bigger than his fear, and a mother trying, one trembling breath at a time, to let him have it. The first day of the trial felt like stepping onto ice that might crack under any wrong move. Dr. Wong had given us a plan, simple, measured, written in calm black ink, but Elodie treated it like a fragile object, something that could shatter if we breathed too hard near it. That morning, she hovered in the kitchen while Kai ate, watching every swallow, every pause, every tiny shift in his expression. When he cleared his throat once, her whole body tightened. Is it starting? She asked him, eyes wide. Kai froze, startled by the question, and I watched the loop try to restart in real time, her fear waking his fear tightening his chest. I stepped in gently, like you do when you're redirecting a child away from a ledge. Let's do what Dr. Wong said, I reminded Elodie. We track what happens. We don't predict disasters. Elodie's mouth pressed into a line, but she nodded, and that nod felt like a small act of courage. The walk was 10 minutes, exactly as prescribed, not because 10 minutes is magic, but because structure was the only language Elodie trusted. Kai wore his jacket zipped to his chin and held his rescue inhaler like a charm. 3 minutes in, he stopped and put a hand on his chest. Tight, he whispered. Elodie, walking beside us, inhaled sharply like she'd been waiting for that word. I didn't rush him back inside. I crouched to his level and said, okay, rate it. He blinked. 5, he said, unsure. Good, I told him. Now tell me what else you notice. Not the scary story, just the facts. He frowned, thinking. My heart is fast, he admitted. My fingers feel cold. That makes sense, I said. It's chilly, and your heart's fast because you're nervous and moving. Neither of those are emergencies. I pulled out the pulse oximeter because Elodie needed numbers to unclench and clipped it on. 97. Elodie exhaled so hard it sounded like surrender. Kai stared at the number, then back at me, and for the first time I saw it, the smallest flicker of trust that his body might not betray him on command. We kept walking. Not far, not fast, but we finished. For the first week, everything was like that. Tiny, deliberate, watched. Elodie texted me even from the same room, as if typing questions was safer than speaking them out loud. How tight? What number? Did he cough? Did he look pale? I answered calmly, consistently, like I was training a nervous system that wasn't only Kai's. Kai's tightness came and went like weather, especially at transition points, before we left the house, before tutoring, before a new task. But the difference was that we started treating the sensation like information instead of prophecy. Tightness is a feeling, I'd tell him, not a verdict. Some days he believed me for 5 minutes. Some days he believed me for 20. By the end of week 1, he'd started asking better questions. Not, am I dying? But, is this because I'm nervous? Not, should I stop? But, can I sit for a minute and try again? The first time he said, it's a 3 now, like he'd learned he could measure his own experience without panicking, I had to look away for a second, because hope can hit you like grief when you've been without it too long. Week 2. His world began to stretch in ways that made Elodie visibly uncomfortable. Kai started noticing things outside the schedule. Birds on power lines, a neighbor's garden, the fact that other kids rode bikes after school, and seemed wildly unconcerned with oxygen saturation. One afternoon, we passed a small park and Kai slowed, watching a group of kids chasing each other, loud and messy and alive. He stood still long enough that I thought he might be getting tight again. But when I looked at his face, he wasn't scared. He was hungry in a way children shouldn't have to be hungry. Do you think they'd let me play? He asked, quiet. Elodie wasn't with us that day. She'd forced herself to stay at work, which was its own kind of progress, but I still felt her presence in the question, the invisible fence around his life. Not today, I said honestly, but someday, yes, we're building up to that. He nodded slowly, like he was filing that someday away as proof he could keep going. Then he surprised me. I don't know how, he said. How to talk to them. His voice cracked a little on the last word. I forgot. That sentence landed heavier than any symptom, because it wasn't about lungs. It was about lost time. 2 days later, I took him to the library, not as a big outing, just as another measured step. While he browsed the kids' section, I wandered past a bulletin board layered with flyers. Most of them were dull, tutoring, bake sales, town meetings. And then I saw it. Bright paper, simple letters. Beginner Kids Sailing Club, ages 9 to 12. Saturdays, 10 a.m., no experience needed. I stared at it longer than I meant to, feeling the story shift beneath my feet the way it always does right before the next hard step. When Kai found me, arms full of books, he followed my gaze. Sailing? He read slowly. His eyes widened, not with fear this time, but with something that looked dangerously close to excitement. Then he caught himself, like he remembered excitement was supposed to be risky, and his hand went automatically to his chest. He paused, waiting for tightness. Nothing happened. He blinked, confused. Would I be allowed? He asked. I looked at him, 10 years old, learning how to exist without bracing, and I knew the real test wasn't wind or water. It was permission. We can ask, I said, and this time we ask with a plan. That night, Kai didn't wait for me to bring it up at the right time. He carried the library flyer like it was contraband, folded tight in his fist, and stood in the kitchen doorway while Elodie unpacked groceries with the tense efficiency of someone trying to control a universe that never stays controlled. Graham was at the counter scrolling through emails, tie loosened, half present. Kai cleared his throat, one small sound that still made Elodie's shoulders jump, and then he held out the paper. Mom, he said, voice steady but careful, can I try this? Elodie took the flyer like it might burn her. Her eyes moved over the words, Beginner Kids Sailing Club, ages 9 to 12, Saturdays. I watched her face change in stages, confusion, then fear, then the defensive anger fear often wears when it doesn't want to be exposed. Sailing, she said flatly. On the water. It's a beginner group, Kai said quickly. They wear life vests. It's organized. Elodie's hand tightened on the paper. Organized doesn't mean safe, she snapped, then caught herself and tried to soften. Baby, the wind, cold air. We can bundle, Kai said, and I have my inhaler. Elodie's eyes flicked to me like I had planted the idea inside his brain. You showed him this, she accused. He found it, I said calmly, and he asked. He asks because he doesn't understand what's at stake, Elodie said, voice rising. He's finally feeling a little better, and now he thinks he can just be a kid, I said, quieter than her, which made her stop for a second. The silence stretched. Graham looked up, finally fully in the room. Elle, he said carefully, Dr. Wong said we expand in steps. This could be one of those steps. Elodie turned on him, disbelief sharp. You're taking her side? I'm taking Kai's side, Graham answered, and the steadiness in his voice made the air shift. Kai stood there, shoulders stiff, waiting for the verdict like he always had. Only now his eyes held something new, something that wasn't resignation. It was hope, and hope made Elodie look terrified, like she didn't trust it to stay. What if he gets tight out there? She demanded. What if he panics? What if he can't breathe and we're stuck on the water? Kai's hand drifted toward his chest out of habit, then stopped midair like he remembered what we'd been practicing. If I get tight, he said, I can sit. I can breathe slow. Mina showed me. Elodie's gaze snapped back to me. You're training him to ignore symptoms, she said. No, I replied. I'm training him to tell the difference between a sensation and an emergency. That's not ignoring. That's learning. Elodie's lips trembled. You make it sound simple, she whispered. It isn't simple, I said gently, but it's possible. Graham stepped closer to her, lowering his voice like he was talking to the part of her that still remembered how to be reasonable. One session, he said. We go with him. We watch the whole time. If he struggles, we stop. We don't have to commit to anything. Elodie stared at the flyer as if the paper contained a prophecy. Then she looked at Kai, really looked, and I saw the war in her eyes. The part that wanted to lock the world out forever, and the part that missed her son before fear became the family language. Kai swallowed once. Please, he said, just once. Elodie shut her eyes, drew a shaky breath, and nodded like she was stepping off a ledge. One session, she said, and I'm there, the whole time. And at the first sign, we stop, I finished for her. Kai exhaled a long breath that sounded like relief. Saturday came gray and cold, the kind of coastal morning that makes the world feel sharpened. The marina was alive in a way the Quinn house never was. Ropes creaking, gulls yelling, kids laughing too loudly, parents calling out reminders that sounded normal instead of panicked. Kai stood in a bright life vest that looked slightly too big, cheeks pink from the wind, inhaler tucked in the front pocket like a reassurance he could touch. Elodie sat rigid on a bench near the dock, hands clasped so tightly I thought her fingers might go numb. Graham stood behind her with one palm resting on her shoulder like an anchor. I stayed close enough to steady her if she tipped into panic, but not so close that it felt like I was crowding her fear. The instructor, a sunburned woman named Maris with calm eyes, knelt in front of Kai and spoke to him the way you speak to children you trust. You ever been on a boat? She asked. Kai shook his head. Perfect, she said. Then today you learn. Wind isn't the enemy. It's just energy. I saw Kai glance at Elodie as if to check whether he was allowed to believe that. Elodie's mouth opened, ready to warn him, but she stopped herself, barely, and that tiny restraint felt like progress. Kai stepped onto the dock, paused, looked down at the water. His breathing quickened, but he didn't bolt. He looked at me instead. I'm getting tight, he said, not panicked, just reporting. Rate it, I said softly. 4, he answered after a moment, surprised by his own calm. I pulled out the pulse oximeter more for Elodie than for him. 98. Elodie's shoulders dropped a fraction. Kai nodded once, like his body had just shown him a receipt that said, See, you're okay. Then he took another step and another until he was in the boat with 2 other kids, hands on a rope, listening hard. When the sail caught the wind and the little boat moved, Kai's face changed, wide-eyed, stunned, then bright in a way I hadn't seen yet. He laughed, an actual laugh that flew out of him before he could censor it. Elodie made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Halfway through, the boat bumped gently against another, and Kai jolted, but then he steadied himself the way we'd practiced, slow breath, shoulders down, and kept going. At the end, he ran down the dock toward us, hair wind-messed, cheeks flushed, alive. That was amazing, he said, breathless. He looked at Elodie, eyes shining. Can I come back next week? Elodie stared at him like she was seeing him for the first time in years. Tears slid down her face without permission. Yes, she whispered, voice breaking open. Yes, you can. And in that moment, the fear didn't disappear, but it loosened, just enough for joy to slip through. The week after sailing, the house felt different. Not warm exactly, not suddenly carefree, but less sealed. Like someone had cracked a window and the air was remembering how to move. Kai talked about the marina the way kids talk when something belongs to them. Fast, detailed, delighted. He practiced knots with a shoelace at the kitchen table. He made little sails out of paper and balanced them on cups, narrating imaginary wind directions under his breath. The best part wasn't the hobby. It was that he had a topic that wasn't his chest. Elodie tried to hide how much it shook her. She still watched him like a hawk, still flinched at throat clearing, still asked for numbers in that tight voice that meant she was trying not to panic. But her questions shifted. They softened around the edges. Did he have fun? Started appearing in her texts alongside, any tightness? One afternoon she walked in while Kai was laughing at a video of a dog on a surfboard. Full laugh, shoulders shaking, and I braced for the familiar warning about excitement. Instead, she stopped in the doorway, stared at him like she'd walked into a miracle, and whispered, "Oh." Just that. A single syllable, like her body didn't have language for what she was seeing. We kept the trial boring on purpose. 10-minute walks became 15. The scheduled rescue doses disappeared unless there was an actual need. Dr. Huang had warned us that the first real test wouldn't be wind or cold air. It would be uncertainty. And uncertainty showed up on Tuesday afternoon when Kai came home from a short school visit, 2 hours just to see his classroom, pale and quiet. He sat on the couch and pressed his hand to his chest. "Tight," he said, voice strained. Elodie was home early that day, and I watched her body react like it always had. Stiffening, eyes widening, reaching for the inhaler like a reflex. "Okay," I said quickly, not to stop her from caring, but to stop the spiral. "Kai, rate it." His breathing was fast, but his color was good. No wheeze, no retractions. 6, he said. Elodie's face crumpled. "See?" she whispered to Graham, to me, to the universe. "It's happening again." I clipped on the pulse oximeter. 98. I could feel Elodie wanting to argue with the number. "What happened right before it?" I asked Kai, keeping my voice steady like a metronome. He swallowed. "We had to introduce ourselves," he admitted, and everyone looked at me. Elodie froze, guilt flashing across her face like a pain response. Of course they looked. He was the kid who'd been gone, the mystery absence. Kai's shoulders rose. "I thought I'd mess up," he said. "Then it got tight." I nodded. "That makes sense," I said. "That's nerves. Nerves feel like tightness. It doesn't mean you're in danger." Elodie's hand hovered over the inhaler. "But what if it turns into—" She started. I met her eyes. "What if we try the plan first?" I asked gently. 2 minutes. If it doesn't improve, we use the inhaler. You're not abandoning him. You're teaching his body a new ending. Elodie's eyes filled. She looked at Kai, looked at his oxygen number, looked at her own trembling hand. Then she did something I didn't expect. She put the inhaler down on the coffee table and sat beside him instead. "Okay," she whispered. 2 minutes. Kai's eyes widened, as if he couldn't believe she was letting him try. I guided him through what Dr. Huang called neutral breathing. Slow in, slow out, not dramatic, not heroic. "Name 5 things you can see," I said. "Lamp," he whispered. "Your shoes, the plant, the window, Mom's necklace." Elodie's hand went to her necklace like she just remembered it existed. Kai's shoulders dropped. His breath slowed. After a minute, he blinked and said, surprised, "It's 4 now." Elodie let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Okay," she said, voice shaking. "Okay." Another minute passed. Kai's hand slid off his chest. 3, he said. Elodie covered her mouth, crying silently. I didn't celebrate. I didn't say see, because fear hates being mocked. I just said, "Good job," to Kai and then softly to Elodie. "That was you too." At the next follow-up, Dr. Huang nodded through our notes like she'd been expecting this exact shape of progress. "He's retraining," she said. "And so are you," she added, looking directly at Elodie. Elodie swallowed hard. "I don't know how to stop scanning him," she confessed. "My brain keeps looking for the moment everything falls apart." Dr. Huang's expression softened. "Then give your brain a new job," she said. "Scan for recovery. Track resilience. Make that the proof." On the drive home, Elodie sat quietly, then surprised me by asking, "Do you think he could invite a friend over?" It was the first time she'd said the word friend without immediately following it with germs. I looked back at Kai in the rearview mirror. 10 years old, tired of being brave, learning how to be normal. "Yes," I said. "I think he's ready." And for the first time, I realized Elodie might be getting ready too. The first time Kai invited a friend over, Elodie cleaned the house like she was preparing for surgery. Wiped counters twice, sprayed doorknobs. set out hand sanitizer in a neat line by the entryway. I watched her from the kitchen with a strange tenderness because I could see the effort underneath the compulsion. She was trying to keep her fear from driving the car. "We don't have to do all that," I said gently. Elodie didn't stop moving. "I know," she whispered, and then admitted the truth that lived under every wipe and spray. "But my body thinks if I don't, something bad will happen." I nodded. "Okay," I said. "Then let's compromise. 1 round of cleaning, not 3, and no sanitizer line like we're running a clinic." She gave a shaky laugh that sounded like someone learning a new muscle. "Fine," she said. 1 round. When the doorbell rang, Elodie flinched anyway. Kai stood behind her, bouncing slightly on his toes. Excitement bright and dangerous in the old story. I watched him pause, hand hovering near his chest out of habit. Then he dropped it. He looked at me like he was asking permission without words. I nodded once. He opened the door himself. Theo was smaller than Kai, freckled, all elbows and grin, holding a shoebox with air holes punched into the lid. "I brought my hermit crab," he announced proudly, as if that was the currency of friendship. Kai's eyes widened. "You have a crab?" "Yeah," Theo said. "His name is Captain." Kai laughed, quick, surprised, and for a second I saw Elodie's shoulders tense, waiting for tightness to punish him for joy. But nothing happened. The laugh just existed, and Elodie stared like she was witnessing physics behaving differently. The boys carried the shoebox to the living room and sat cross-legged on the rug, whispering about Captain's food and how long he could live and whether crabs got lonely. It was so normal it almost hurt. Graham came home early, stopped in the doorway, and his face softened in a way I hadn't seen yet, like he'd been bracing for years and didn't realize he could put his guard down. He caught my eye and mouthed, "Thank you," but I shook my head slightly. This wasn't my victory. It was theirs. Half an hour in, Kai's cheeks were flushed from laughing, and I saw the old fear flicker across Elodie's face again. "Maybe they should take a break," she said quietly, voice tight. Kai looked up, the smile fading, the old reflex waking. "Am I too loud?" he asked, suddenly unsure. Elodie's eyes filled instantly, like she hated herself for what her fear did to him. Before I could speak, Graham did. "No," he said firmly, walking closer. "You're allowed to be loud." He looked at Elodie then, and his voice softened. "El, he's not breaking. He's living." Elodie pressed her palm to her mouth, nodded, and sat down on the couch instead of hovering. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, keep going." Kai stared at her for a second, as if he didn't trust permission until it repeated. Then he turned back to Theo and said, "Do you want to see my knots?" It was such a small sentence, but it carried everything: pride, interest, a future. Later, after Theo's mom picked him up and the house fell quiet again, Kai went upstairs humming to himself, shoelace still looped around his fingers like a rope. Elodie stayed in the kitchen, staring at the empty juice cups and the scattered crackers like they were evidence of something holy. "I forgot what this looked like," she said softly. "A kid," I replied. She nodded, swallowing hard. "I thought if I let him be a kid, I'd lose him," she admitted. "So I tried to keep him safe by shrinking his world." Her voice shook on the last word, and I could hear the guilt trying to turn into punishment. I stepped closer, careful. "You kept him alive the only way you knew how," I said. "But now you're learning a new way." Elodie shook her head, tears falling. "What if I ruined him?" she whispered. "You didn't ruin him," I said. "He's right upstairs humming." She let out a broken laugh. "He's humming," she repeated, like she needed to say it out loud to believe it. That night, when I drove home through Alder Cove's dark, wet streets, I realized something else had shifted too. In the ICU, I was always braced for the worst ending. It was how I survived. But in that house, with that boy and that terrified mother learning to loosen her grip, I was watching a different kind of medicine happen, slow, unglamorous, made of small permissions. And for the first time since I'd walked out of Harborview, my chest felt quiet. Not numb, quiet. Like maybe healing wasn't something I'd lost when I left the hospital. Maybe it was something I'd just been trying to find a safer way to carry. By the time the second month rolled around, Kai's life started filling up the way an empty house fills when someone finally lives in it. Shoes by the door, a backpack slumped over a chair, a calendar on the fridge with actual events that weren't doctor appointments. Sailing became Saturday, not the scary thing on the water. The walks turned into bike rides around the block. The tightness didn't disappear completely, but it stopped being the main character. Some days, it showed up like a knock on the door, and Kai would pause, hand hovering near his chest out of habit, then lower it and say, almost bored, "It's a 2," or "It's nerves." The first time he said that without looking at me for confirmation, I felt something loosen inside my ribs. Elodie still had hard moments. She'd still wake up at night and text me, "Is he breathing okay?" Like her brain couldn't accept peace without checking it for traps. But she started catching herself. She started correcting her own sentences. What if he would become, "Okay, if he does, we'll handle it." It wasn't perfect, but it was progress you could measure in the space between panic and response. The real test came on a rainy Thursday when the school called mid-morning. Kai had complained of tightness during gym and asked to sit out. The old version of this story would have ended with Elodie racing to pick him up, a nebulizer session, a spiral of texts to specialists, and another week of rest. I heard Elodie's intake of breath when she answered the phone, saw her eyes go wide, watched the old terror snap awake like muscle memory. She hung up and looked at me, shaking. "It's happening again," she whispered, like the universe had been waiting to punish her for hope. Kai was at the table doing homework, and when he saw her face, his own shoulders hunched automatically, ready to become sick for her. I stepped in fast, not forceful, just steady. "Elodie," I said, "what does Dr. Wang want us to do first?" Elodie blinked, dragged herself back to the plan like it was a rope. "Data," she said faintly. "Objective, not fear." "Right," I said. "So we called the nurse back and asked the questions. Oxygen, wheeze, any retractions, or was it just sensation during exertion?" Elodie swallowed hard, then dialed with trembling fingers. When she hung up the second time, she looked stunned. "His oxygen was normal," she said. "No wheeze. He calmed down when they had him do slow breathing." I nodded. "So what do we do?" I asked gently. Elodie stared at Kai, who was watching us like his whole body depended on her answer. Her voice shook, but she said it anyway. "We don't rescue him from being a person," she whispered. Then she walked over, crouched beside him, and touched his shoulder, not checking him, not scanning him, just being there. "Hey," she said softly, "you did the right thing by taking a break, and you did the breathing. I'm proud of you." Kai blinked, startled like he'd expected disappointment. "So I'm not in trouble?" he asked. Elodie's mouth trembled. "No," she said. "You're learning, that's all." At the next appointment, Dr. Huang listened to the school call story and nodded like she'd been waiting for that exact moment. "This is the part that rewires the system," she said. "Not the good days. The days where the old fear tries to take control and you choose differently." Elodie's eyes filled. "I'm still terrified," she confessed. "Sometimes I feel like if I relax, I'm being irresponsible." Dr. Wang leaned forward. "Vigilance is not the same as care," she said. "Care is responsive. Vigilance is constant. Constant burns everyone out." Elodie laughed once, wet and small. "So I'm the one who needed oxygen," she whispered. Dr. Wang didn't smile, but her voice softened. "You needed safety," she corrected. "And you tried to build it with control. Now you're learning to build it with trust." On the drive home, Elodie surprised me by saying, "I read about harmful parents, the ones who make their kids sick." She couldn't even say the phrase. Her hands clenched on her lap. What if I was doing that? The question came out raw, full of shame. I kept my voice gentle because shame can shove people right back into denial. "Those cases are about intention," I said. "This was about terror. You weren't trying to be seen. You were trying not to lose him." Elodie stared out the window at the gray ocean, tears sliding down quietly. "I'm going to talk to someone," she said suddenly. "A therapist, for me." I glanced at her, surprised and relieved. "That's a strong choice," I said. She nodded once, like she didn't trust herself to say more. 3 weeks later, Kai came home with a permission slip for a field trip and slapped it on the counter like it was nothing. "We're going to the aquarium," he announced, casual, like kids do when their world is wide. Elodie picked up the slip, read it, and for a second I saw the fear flare. Bus ride, crowds, excitement. Then she closed her eyes, took one slow breath, and signed her name. Kai froze, waiting for the usual caveat. "And?" he asked. Elodie looked at him, eyes shiny, and smiled. Small, real. "And have fun," she said. Kai's face broke open into a grin so bright it made the whole sterile house feel different. Later that night, After Kai went upstairs, Elodie stood in the living room and looked around at the scattered signs of childhood: rope knots on the coffee table, a damp life vest hanging by the door, crumbs from after-school snacks, and whispered, almost like a confession, "I thought protecting him meant keeping him small." She turned to me, voice shaking. I didn't realize I was teaching him to be afraid of living. I felt my own throat tighten, the old ICU grief and the new kind of hope colliding. "You're teaching him something else now," I said. Elodie nodded slowly. "Yeah," she whispered. "I'm teaching him he can come back." When I got into my car afterward, rain tapping softly on the windshield, I sat for a minute with my hands on the steering wheel and realized my chest was quiet again. Not numb, not shut down, just calm. In the hospital, healing was loud. Alarms, rushing feet, desperate interventions. Here, healing looked like a mother signing a field trip permission slip and not collapsing under the weight of what-ifs. It looked like a boy laughing without apologizing for his lungs. It looked like fear still existing, but no longer running the house. And for the first time since I'd left Harborview, I understood something that felt like forgiveness. I hadn't stopped being someone who helps people breathe. I just learned to do it in a way that doesn't steal my own air in return. The first time I watched Kai sail without Elodie hovering at the edge of the dock, it felt like witnessing a quiet miracle, small, ordinary, and therefore enormous. It was late spring by then, the kind of morning where the fog lifts slowly and the air smells like wet rope and salt, and Kai moved through the marina like he belonged there. Life vest buckled, hair already wind-messed, laughing with Theo and two other kids whose names he'd learned without needing a schedule or a pulse reading to survive it. Elodie sat farther back on a bench with a coffee she wasn't drinking, hands clasped in her lap like she still didn't trust her body not to lunge into panic. But she stayed seated. She watched. When Kai glanced at her, just a quick check, the old habit trying to return, she lifted one hand and waved, not frantic, not signaling, "Are you okay?" Just a wave. Kai's shoulders loosened, and he turned back to the water. Graham stood beside Elodie, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder. And for the first time since I'd met them, he looked like a father watching a child grow instead of a man guarding a disaster. I felt something in my chest soften. Not triumph, relief. The kind you don't let yourself feel in an ICU because relief is always temporary there. Here, relief could be a new baseline if you protected it. After that, the wins came in a steady trickle. Almost boring, which was the point. Kai started going to school full-time. Not trying school, not visiting, not 2 hours if he feels up to it, but school, 5 days a week, backpack on, shoes on, out the door with the other kids. He joined a beginner PE group and came home sweaty and proud. He got invited to a birthday party and didn't look at me like I'd offered him skydiving. He just asked if he could bring a gift card or if that was lame. Elodie had her own milestones too, quieter but just as brave. She started therapy and at first treated it like another medical appointment, structured, scheduled, something to endure. Then one night she admitted, almost embarrassed, "I didn't realize how much of my life was built around waiting for something terrible." She started catching herself when her mind raced ahead. When she had a what-if thought, she'd say it out loud sometimes, then correct it. "Okay, if that happens, we have a plan." The first time she said that, without needing my eyes or a number to validate her, I nearly cried. Because I could see it. Her nervous system learning that constant vigilance wasn't love. It was a cage. And she was finally stepping out of it. There was still a hard day here and there, because healing isn't a straight line. It's a practice. Kai had a rough afternoon once after a big test at school. Tightness, shaking hands, that familiar something's wrong feeling. Elodie called me from work, voice high, ready to drive straight to the nurse's office, and I heard her stop herself mid-sentence. "Okay," she said, and she took one slow breath right into the phone. "What does he need right now?" I told her. "He needs someone to remind him it's nerves, and it will pass." Elodie went anyway, but she didn't rescue him out of school. She sat beside him in the nurse's office, hand on his back, and coached him through the same grounding techniques he'd learned. Later, Kai told me, almost amazed, she didn't freak out. Elodie overheard him and laughed, an actual laugh, and said, "I wanted to. I just didn't." That sentence contained a whole new life. One evening, after Kai went upstairs, Elodie and Graham and I stood in the living room where the air used to feel filtered and sterile, and now it smelled like popcorn and marker ink, and the faint damp of a life vest hung over a chair. Elodie looked around at the mess, at the proof of a childhood returning, and her voice broke softly when she said, "I thought I was protecting him, but I was teaching him to be afraid of being alive." Graham squeezed her hand and didn't rush to fix the feeling. I didn't either. I just let the truth sit in the room without turning into blame. "You changed," I said quietly. "When it mattered, you changed." Elodie wiped her face and nodded. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "But now I'm scared, and I do it anyway." She said it like she was describing Kai, but I knew she was talking about herself too. When I drove home that night, rain ticking on my windshield, I realized I hadn't stopped being the person who helps people breathe. I just stopped believing it had to be loud and bloody and heroic to count. Sometimes it looks like a kid walking into school with a backpack. Sometimes it looks like a mother signing a permission slip and not collapsing under the weight of the future. Sometimes it looks like a house that used to hold its breath finally exhaling. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was running from the ICU. I felt like I'd carried what I knew into a place where it could heal someone without breaking me in the process. By early summer, the Quinn house didn't look like a clinic anymore. It still had its clean lines and glass walls and expensive quiet, but the quiet had changed, less filtered, more lived in. A damp towel slung over a chair from a spontaneous sprinkler run, a stack of library books on the coffee table with dog-eared pages, a half-finished bowl of cereal that no one panicked over because a child had finally learned that leaving a mess didn't mean leaving his breath behind. The medication bins were still in a drawer, but they weren't lined up like soldiers on the counter. The pulse oximeter lived in the first aid kit now, not on the table like a judge. When I noticed that one afternoon, it hit me harder than the big moments ever had. The big moments were dramatic. Sailing, school, Theo's visit. This was quiet proof. Fear had stopped being decor. The call that made me realize we'd crossed into a different life came on a Tuesday, months after that first porch step. It was Elodie. Not frantic, not whispering through a tight throat, just normal. "Mina," she said, almost amused. "Kai's on the back deck arguing with Graham about whether sharks can smell fear." I smiled without meaning to, and I asked, "And I'm just listening," she said, like she couldn't believe her own sentence. "He's being loud. He's being ridiculous. He's fine." There was a pause, and then her voice softened. I didn't know we could sound like this again. The words landed in me, warm and aching. "You did the hard part," I told her. "You let the house learn a new rhythm." Elodie exhaled, a real exhale. "I'm still learning," she admitted, "but it's not running me anymore." 2 weeks later, Dr. Wong cleared Kai for the next step, a short summer day camp run by the community center. Not a medical program, not a special group for fragile kids, just camp. Crafts, swimming, soccer, loud lunches, sunscreen, and scraped knees. Elodie stared at the enrollment form like it was a dare. "A whole day," she whispered, to herself more than to me. Kai bounced beside her, trying to look casual and failing. "It's just camp," he said, and then, because he couldn't help himself, "Theo's going." Elodie's eyes flicked to me for a split second, the old what if rising like a wave. I didn't answer it for her. I just waited. She closed her eyes, took one slow breath, and signed her name. Kai froze like he expected the pen to stop halfway. When it didn't, his face broke into a grin so bright it made the whole room feel different. "Really?" he asked. Elodie looked up, eyes glossy, and nodded. "Really?" she said. "Go be a kid." Kai ran upstairs to tell Theo immediately, footsteps thundering, and Elodie flinched, then laughed at herself. "God," she murmured, smiling through tears, "I used to think that sound meant danger." She glanced at me. "Now it just means him." On the first day of camp, I expected Elodie to crumble in the parking lot. I expected her to hold Kai's shoulders too tightly, to give him a checklist of warning signs, to make him promise he'd sit out if he felt anything at all. Instead, she knelt, straightened his collar, and said, "If you feel nervous, you know what to do." Kai nodded. "Breathe slow. Name what I see. It passes," he recited, almost bored with it now. Elodie smiled and kissed his forehead. "And if you need help?" she asked. "I ask," he said simply. No drama, no prophecy. A child who trusted the world enough to ask for help instead of assuming catastrophe. Kai ran off toward a group of kids and immediately started talking, hands flying, laughter already in his voice. Elodie stood beside me watching, hands clasped but not white-knuckled. "How do you feel?" I asked her quietly. She swallowed. "Terrified," she said honestly, then surprised both of us by adding, "and proud." She looked at me, and for the first time there was no defensiveness in her eyes. Just truth. "I thought love meant holding him tight enough to keep the universe from touching him," she said. "But love is letting him be touched by life." My throat tightened, the way it does when you hear a sentence you'll carry forever. "Yeah," I managed. "That's it." Later that evening, when Kai came home sunburned and loud and exhausted in the best way, he sprawled on the living room floor and talked nonstop about canoe races and a kid who fell in the pool and the counselor who made them chant silly songs. Elodie sat on the couch, watching him like he was a story she couldn't believe she got back. When Kai finally fell asleep, real sleep, the kind earned by living, Elodie and I stood in the kitchen with the window cracked open, night air slipping in, salt and cedar and ordinary. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For not letting me fire you," I teased, and she actually laughed. Then her expression turned serious again. "No," she said, "for seeing what I couldn't see through my fear." I shook my head. "You saw it?" I told her. "You just needed permission to believe it." Elodie nodded slowly and her voice broke when she said, "So did he." Driving home, I realized something else had healed without me noticing. I wasn't listening for alarms anymore. I wasn't bracing for the worst ending in every quiet moment. The ICU had taught me to expect loss as the default, to measure peace in seconds before the next call light. But here, in this coastal town, I had watched a family rewrite their default. Not by denying danger exists, but by refusing to let fear be the author of their child's life. And somewhere along the way, I'd done the same for myself. I didn't leave healthcare because I stopped caring. I left because I cared too much in a place that only rewarded emergency. Now I was learning that healing can be slow and still be real. That saving someone doesn't always look like rushing. Sometimes it looks like standing back on a dock, hands unclenched, and letting a child sail into the wind like it was always meant for him. Life will try to convince you that safety is the same thing as control, that if you scan hard enough, plan tightly enough, worry loudly enough, you can keep pain from finding the people you love. But control isn't peace. It's just fear with a schedule. Real peace comes from learning the difference between a warning and a story your mind is inventing, between a hard moment and a catastrophe you're rehearsing in advance. If you've been through something scary, your instincts may start treating every uncertainty like an emergency. That's normal, but you don't have to let that instinct run your whole life. Start small. Trade constant what-if spirals for simple questions like, what do I know for sure right now? And what's the next right step? Let yourself use support, doctors, therapists, friends, not to feed the panic, but to build a plan you can trust. And if you love someone, don't love them by shrinking their world. Love them by teaching them how to move through it, with tools, with confidence, with room to fall and get back up. Healing isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just choosing over and over to let life be bigger than fear.